large slave population. For that matter, New York still has slaves. And so the question of what would happen to slavery, would the Constitution give the national government the power to eventually alter or abolish slavery? The answer to that question is kind of no. Right? And here's how, I mean, we wrote an essay about that. Of course, nobody knew what we were talking about then, but we did write an essay about that. But the reason I'd say the Constitution does not give the national government the authority to abolish slavery is, in order to abolish it, the Constitution had to be amended. Correct? I mean, the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, an amendment means a change in the Constitution, is what abolished slavery. So if the national government could have abolished slavery without the 13th Amendment, you would have suspected that they would have done so. But, you know, obviously they could not. Now, we know this. We know that slave or slavery is not mentioned in the Constitution. But that did not, you know, eliminate the fact that there were, in fact, slaves. So the question was, how would they be counted? What would they be counted as? Would they be counted as people for the purpose of representation and taxation? Would they be counted as property? And remember, in terms of taxation and representation, slaves were counted on the basis of 3/5 or 5/3. Every 5 slaves were counted as 3 people, actually. And we call this the 3/5 compromise. Now, so in terms of slavery, slavery survives the Revolution. Slavery survives the Constitutional Convention. When the Constitution is ratified, there is still slaves in slavery. The Constitution would do nothing to really eliminate slavery. But, on the other hand, nor did the Constitution do anything to prohibit individual states from eliminating slavery, which they did, right? I mean, other states chose to prohibit slavery, and the Constitution did not stop them. So on some level, I'm not sure the Founding Fathers didn't believe that the Constitution allowed for the eventual and gradual abolition of slavery. Now, the South isn't going to see it that way. The South is going to argue that the Constitution explicitly, or at least implicitly, protected the institution of slavery as property. Right? You know, I mean, it's a big conversation. Last compromise, because Kelly Koo is leaving. I don't know where she's going. Yes, go ahead.
Didn't they also have anything about the slave trade? Like
yes, I'm glad you brought that up. Another thing that was true is in the Constitution, it was agreed that Congress would not be able to regulate the slave trade for 20 years. But the international slave trade was abolished in the United States in 1808 by Congress under the Constitution. Now, although you might think that that was something that slaveholders might not like, some slaveholders did like it. Because to abolish the international slave trade is to increase the value of the slaves that were already here. So if more slaves kept coming in, the slaves that are already here go down in value. So people, particularly from the northern South, Virginia, the people that were selling their slaves, they didn't want the slave trade to continue because then they wouldn't be able to, you know, sell their slaves. Anyways, the last compromise had to do with the president. Would there be one person, right, who would be the chief executive? And what powers would this person have? And how would they be elected? What was eventually agreed that there would be one person who would be the chief executive, the president of the United States, and this person would be elected by an electoral college to serve for 4-year terms that were renewable indefinitely. The original Constitution allowed the Electoral College to elect a person to the presidency every 4 years forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And to some extent, that may have been what would have happened if Washington would not have decided to retire after 8 years, and then Jefferson follow that lead after 8 years, and then Jackson following that lead after 8 years, right? So, I mean, when we talk about Jefferson and Washington and Jackson being popular presidents. So a precedent was set that presidents would only serve 8 terms, but that was not mandated in the Constitution until the 1950s. Now, the Electoral College obviously is an interesting thing as well, but Melissa, the kids are anxious. They want out the door, so we'll talk about that later. In ways, I apologize for that. Can you put this on in cyberspace?
What was the compromise called? The last one.
I don't think it had.